So I'm sure by now, all you guys have seen tons and tons of videos about the brand new Canon R5, which is Canon's newly announced 8K RAW recording beast of a camera. Now, I'm a Sony fanboy. I've got tons of Sony bodies, Sony glass, but I'd be lying if I told you that I was not super excited to see this camera. The main reason being is that anytime any camera manufacturer comes out with a unique feature or something that's really pushing the envelope, all the other camera companies have to respond. So now Nikon, Panasonic, and Sony are all going to be responding to Canon's, honestly, quite insane list of specs for this new camera. Now, I'm not going to be listing off the specs. I just wanted to give you a little perspective from, I guess, a Sony user, and also for all you prospective buyers out there that may not be professional video producers or people that are making video for like their main source of income or even a kind of a side gig. Because there's one aspect of this camera that I think you could really overlook if you aren't really careful and understanding exactly what you're getting yourselves into. I'm actually not even going to be talking about the overheating issues or the potential overheating issues for the new Canon camera, because that's just kind of a side effect of pushing the industry forward. And honestly, I don't think it's as big of a deal as a lot of people may be thinking. And actually, that is something I do want to touch on first, is how the overheating may not be that big of an issue when you kind of put things into perspective of who the camera is for. So who is this camera made for? Is it made for video professionals or amateurs or hobbyists? If you fall into one of those three categories, chances are it's not meant for you. Really, who this camera is meant for is the kind of mid-budget indie filmmaker, or honestly, even Hollywood budget films. Because if you really think about it, you know, I said I wouldn't talk about the overheating, but this is just one little aspect of it. If you think about how this camera may only be able to record for 20 minutes at a time for 8K RAW recording, if you're a wedding filmmaker or a travel videographer, that's not going to do it for you. That's just not going to do it for you, because you need longer takes than that to be able to use it as a true professional camera. However, if you're on a high budget Hollywood production, it's not a big deal to have this camera like on the front bumper of a car, and if it crashes or gets destroyed, it's not a big deal because it's only a $4,000 camera as opposed to like a $40,000 RED camera or ARRI camera. So this is also meant for kind of that mid-budget indie filmmaker that will now have access to 8K and RAW recording internally in their camera. And that's something they may have not been able to do before unless they had a RED or an ARRI available to them, which will now be accessible to them for just $4,000. So what I really wanted to talk about isn't the overheating or who this camera is made for. What I really wanted to talk about is for those prospective buyers out there who may be unaware of exactly what they're looking at when they look at the spec sheets. Because yeah, 8K RAW recording and 4K 120 frames a second looks awesome. And actually, I'm super excited about it. I would love to have 4K 120 frames per second. However, when you really break down what this is going to require for you to make this work, it really starts to add up quick, because you aren't just talking about the $4,000 camera anymore. Now you're really having to think about the peripherals that are going to come along with that camera. So the peripheral that I'm actually going to be talking about is the CF Express card, which is the card that you have to have if you want to be recording 8K RAW or the 4K 120 frames per second. Now, the reason I think that this is such a big deal is because if you aren't familiar with the specs that you're looking at on the spec sheet, when you see that the 8K RAW recording requires 2600 megabits per second recording speeds, that may just fly over your head, and you might not even be realizing, number one, the card space, or number two, the hard drive space, or number three, the time that you have available on a card. And let me just put this into perspective. If you're recording 8K RAW onto that CF Express card and you have a 1 terabyte CF Express, you only have 50 minutes of recording time. Now, you might be thinking, okay, yeah, no big deal. I'll just get a second CF Express card, which is great. That was definitely what I would recommend. I definitely wouldn't be just traveling around with a single card. But the problem is that those CF Express cards are anywhere from $700, $800, $900 for just a single one of those CF Express cards. So when you have a $4,000 camera and then you're having to spend another $900 on just the card, and if you want a second card, it's another $900, you're already like $6,000 deep into this camera system. Now that's a new concept for DSLRs or mirrorless cameras, where you can typically just take an SD card and slap it into the side of the camera and you're good to go. You probably have a dozen SD cards at home. But when you start talking about these huge expenses on the back end, or these additional pieces that you need for the camera, that's when things can kind of get dangerous if you aren't familiar with some of those aspects of cameras. Because somebody who's buying like a RED camera, for example, they already know if they're gonna go out and buy a $6,000 or $10,000 RED camera, that they have to get a cage for it, they have to get a monitor, they have to get the expensive RED mags, which are the memory cards for the cameras, and they know that if they get a $6,000 camera, that they're probably gonna be spending closer to $10,000 or $15,000 overall. So with these DSLRs, that's something that's just we've never had to deal with before. So if you're going out there and just buying the camera thinking that you'll be able to just, boom, record 8K, that's where you can get into trouble. And like, let's say you do have enough money to spend on the CF Express card, and you have dropped the $1,800 or however much it costs for the 2 cards, and you go out on a trip. If you are out there for multiple days and you're recording 8K or 4K 120 and you have a ton of footage, you have to have the hard drive space to go along with it. So when I was out in Iceland, I was there for 5 days and I filmed a little over 9 hours of footage over those few days. And if you were recording in the 8K or 4K 120, which, to be fair, the 4K 120 I think is at a lower bit rate than the 8K, which is 2600 megabits per second. If you were recording at that 8K and you had 9 or 10 hours of footage, you'd be looking at 11 terabytes of data that you'd have to be handling while you're out in a foreign place. And while that may not sound like a big deal, if you have like a solid state drive, which is what I would definitely recommend getting for a trip where you're hiking or backpacking, those solid state drives only come in like a 2 terabyte capacity. So you'd have to have 6 of those drives just in case you end up filming more. So that's like another $1,800 just for extra storage if you're out on a trip, which is honestly completely ridiculous to have that much storage space. And then when you come back, you also have to have all of that footage consolidated onto a single space. So you'd probably need something like a network attached storage, a NAS drive, NAS array, which is, again, another multiple thousands of dollars. So if you don't already have the infrastructure in place with the memory cards, the mobile storage, and also the network attached storage for your computer, and also a powerful computer to edit it, that's why I'm kind of making this video, to kind of put things into perspective of how you can kind of get in a hole really fast with a camera like this. So negative talk over, because actually I am truly excited about this camera. Like I said, I am a Sony fanboy, but I think that there are cameras that come along every once in a while that really change the game. First one, like I said, the Canon 5D Mark II was the originator of this new DSLR and sort of mirrorless camera revolution that took the filmmaking and video professional work from those huge bulky camcorders down to a small form factor like the camera I'm filming this on right now. And then, to be honest, I think that the A7S II also changed a lot. It was one of the first cameras that could do the internal 4K recording, had the in-body image stabilization. I think it was a huge change in the world of cameras, and it was really what took the DSLR and changed it to mirrorless. And now this Canon camera may be that next step in camera technology that professionals will use. And the most important thing that I think this camera is going to do is push the industry, because to be fair, it's kind of been stagnant for a few years. You know, the A7S II, which came out maybe 4 or 5 years ago, nothing has really changed since then. Even the A7 III that I'm recording this on right now, specs really aren't that different from that camera that came out nearly a half decade ago. And now Canon is pushing the envelope, and I'm excited to see what Nikon, Panasonic, and Sony are all gonna have to offer to try to compete with what Canon is doing right now. And ignore the overheating issues, because that's something that either could be fixed in firmware, or when there's like an R5 Mark II, I would guess that Canon will deal with these problems, because a lot of people do forget, and I see a lot of Sony fanboys out there talking crap about Canon overheating and laughing about it, but what they really forget is that the Sony cameras were the first ones to be having that issue. The A7S II, the A6300, both of those cameras were notorious for overheating, and people still used it in professional applications. So I could be sitting here and talking about how a lot of video professionals might not even use the camera because of these issues, but then again, people have worked around it before. People have dealt with more serious issues with their cameras before, and they have made incredible things with it. So what do you guys think about the R5? I mean, I think that everybody should be excited about this camera, regardless of what they think about the stats, what name is on it, or what issues may possibly arise in the camera, because I think that it's huge for everybody. So let me know down below, what do you guys think about this camera? Let me know down below what you think about this camera, and I will see you guys on the next one.